So I'm basically going to explain a bit what we know about the early universe. So I call it the dawn of the universe, which is the beginning of our universe. So the first question that, please ask questions anytime if you want. So the first question that I think one has is, I'm supposed to be a cosmologist, so the first topic is to say what a cosmologist is, because sometimes they ask you, and after a while I have a standard answer, so this is the answer that I give. So what is a cosmologist? So I think it's a good approximation. So a cosmologist is interested in the universe as a whole, in a sense that he or she does not care about stars, galaxies, is more interested in the global picture. Okay? And so if you want an analogy, you should think about a cosmologist as some sort of geographer, which he wants to create a map of the universe. And this is quite similar to what we do on the Earth. Okay? So of course, now we know the Earth very well, but if you go back 100 or 200 years, back then, you remember, there were these maps that were not complete. Some regions were known, some regions were not known. And as I will show, we are really in this similar situation for the universe. So we are exploring, there are maps. So this is one of these maps that I will explain what it is. There are various maps, and we're trying to chart, to describe as much as possible the universe. Okay, this is one analogy, but to some extent, a cosmologist is also an archaeologist. I mean, it's similar to an archaeologist, in the sense that he's also interested in the history of the universe. And also here, the similarity is quite strict. For example, if you describe the history on the Earth, there are all these phases, which I forget the name, but there are various geological eras. And in a similar way, the history of the universe is divided into various phases when some physical process happens, and each one is more specialized in some particular era. So these are two analogies. And so you may ask, okay, so why you have two analogies and not one? Because on the Earth, it's quite different if you are a geographer or if you are an archaeologist. This is quite different. So these are different jobs. In cosmology, you can only be both at the same time. And the reason is pretty clear. If you think for a while. It comes from the fact that the speed of light is finite. It has a certain value, which is very close to 300,000 kilometers per second. So why this is relevant? Because if you observe an object, for example, this is the lighthouse in Trieste, the light takes a bit of time to come from Trieste to here. It takes like 40 minutes by car, but the light takes something like 1/10 of a millisecond. Okay? So when you see the lighthouse of Trieste from here, you see it as it is a fraction of a millisecond ago. Okay, this is not very important. If you do the same thing for the moon, so you observe the moon, the light takes 1.2 seconds to come from the moon. Okay? So when you look at the moon, you see the moon like it was 1.2 seconds ago. Okay. Again, it's not very relevant. If you look at the sun, it starts becoming a bit relevant. It takes 8 minutes to come the light from the sun to us. Okay? So, of course, you see in which direction I'm going. Now, if I start looking at objects which are farther and farther away, you see these objects, but like they were, not now, but like they were here and years ago. Okay? So actually, these things is so direct that in cosmology, we describe distances using time. So we say, I don't know, some galaxies is distant, I don't know, 10 million years, which means that the light takes 10 million, it's a wrong number, but to come to the Earth. Okay? So it's like saying that Milan is 4 hours away, which by car. Okay? Now we use the velocity of light to convert a time into a distance. Okay? So let me show this in some more detail. Okay, so this is a movie, but the nice thing about this movie is that data are real. In a sense, the positions of the object that you will see, not all the images, but the position of the objects is what we know. So it's a map. It's a real map of the universe, and we start from the sun. So this is the sun, and we move away. Okay, and just to give you a flavor that we are really exploring the universe and making a map, putting together what we know. Okay, so we start from the sun. We move away, then the closest star is like a light year away, which is Proxima Centauri. Now we start seeing that all these stars merge to give rise to our galaxy, which is the Milky Way, which is as a size of 100,000 of light years. So this is one galaxy. Then you start seeing various galaxies that now will come. So these are the nearby galaxies. And here we are already talking about millions of light years. Okay? And progressively, these maps will form a map of the universe. And now you will also see that some part of the universe are not mapped yet. Okay, this is an old movie. Nowadays, they are already mapped, but this gives an idea of the fact that you see that there are these sheets, but now you will see better when it rotates. But the point is that I want to convey the fact that we really have a map of our universe, and that some regions, you see, some regions were not explored back, this is like 10 years ago. And this, to me, is similar to when this is similar to when you talk about the Earth. So you remember, if you look at the map of hundreds of years ago, Australia was not there. It was not explored. This part of the world was not explored. And we are in a similar situation. So we are really making maps and exploring the universe. And also what I want to convey is that if you look at very far away galaxies, these galaxies are billion of light years away from us. So the light takes billion of years to move from those galaxies to us. And this is why I was telling you that it's not possible to choose whether you want to be an archaeologist or a geographer, because the only way to observe the universe is to receive signals. And if I want to observe this part of the universe, no matter what I do, I will observe it as it was a billion years ago. Okay? So this story and geography, they go at the same time. Okay? So you are bound to do the same, to do the job at the same time. Okay, so let's come back to the presentation. Okay, I want to explain what are the questions that we want to address. Well, the first thing that when you have a map of the one like the one I showed is what you want to know what is the distance of an object. Okay, because I gave you this movie, but I didn't tell you how they are able to put a certain. So you look around, you see all these objects, but how do I know what is the distance of a given object? And this is it can be done in various ways, but the simplest way is very trivial if you think about it. And the idea is the following: if I give you a light bulb and I tell you this is a light bulb of 100 watts with a given power, so of course if it is here, it's very bright. If I put it 10 meters away, it's dimmer. If I put it 100 meters away, it's even dimmer. So of course, if I know what is the light source, so how much light an object emits, I'm able to relate the distance with the light that I receive in my detector. Okay? So the idea is simple, but the problem is how do I know what is the light that a given object emits, because I cannot go there and check. It turns out that in astrophysics, there are objects which are called standard candles, for obvious reasons. These are astrophysical objects which, for reasons for different reasons, emit a standard quantity of light. Okay? So there are various objects of this kind. Of course, the more powerful, the better, because if I can see them very far away. Okay? And okay, this is a standard technique that started 100 years ago, but it's still very popular and very used nowadays. So, of course, you make progress if you can find standard candles that are very powerful, so that you can explore the universe very, very, very far away. Okay? So in this way, you understand how far an object is. You can also understand the motion of objects. This is a bit trickier, but I think it's pretty clear from this picture. So the technique is to use what is called the Doppler effect, which I remind you, the Doppler effect, I mean, it's clear from the picture. So if you look at this picture, think about like the water on a lake, and there is something which creates waves. Okay? It's pretty clear from this picture, even if I don't tell you, that the object creating the waves is moving in this direction. Okay? So this is called Doppler effect, but it's pretty obvious because you see that here the waves are shorter, so it's clear that there is something which is moving in this direction, so that here the waves are closer and here are more longer. Okay? So using the same effect with light, you can understand what is the motion of an object. Well, you can ask, okay, but how do I know what is the original wavelength? So the original modulation, because if I want to distinguish these from these, I need to know what is the original wavelength of the signal. This is simple because you may know that various substances emits light or absorbs light at very precise frequencies. These are sort of fingerprints of different elements. Okay? So if I give you an element like I don't know, potassium, it will emit and absorb light at particular frequencies that we can easily test in the lab. So if now I look at the galaxy, I observe some line, some potassium line, and I see it that is not the same as in the lab, but is moved in one direction or the other, I will know that that galaxy moves either towards me or away from me. Okay? So in total, using this technique, I understand the distance of a galaxy or any object. If using this technique, I know how objects move. So what is interesting is that people start doing this more or less 100 years ago, a bit more, 120 years. And surprisingly, this was a surprise, because naively, if you start doing this, okay, you would expect maybe that some galaxy is going away from me, some galaxy is coming towards me, okay? It's like a random motion, okay? But this turns out not to be true. It turns out that most of the galaxies are flying away from me, okay? So they are, so if I look around, I see that most of the galaxies are going away, okay? This is somewhat surprising. Technically, people will say that this is called redshift. Redshift in the sense that I told you that if I'm here and the galaxy is going away from me, I see light with longer wavelength. Longer wavelength means if I take a visible light, longer wavelength is the red part of the spectrum, while the blue part is shorter wavelength. Okay? So when you say redshift, it just means that longer wavelengths, which means that the galaxies are going away from me. Okay? So this was very surprising, and I think this was the first big discovery in cosmology, because, I mean, I don't know why, but psychologically, people, okay, you had the impression that you want to believe that the universe is static, or that, okay, it's something that existed and things happens inside this, but you expect that overall it's a static entity. This is not true. It's not true. The universe is evolving, and it has a quite complicated story. So the first guy that understood this is Hubble. So the experiments that he did is really similar to what I was describing. So he was using a telescope, and he was observing the position of various galaxies, measuring the distance using the standard candle technique, and the velocity. And then he was plotting things. So you plot the distance on this axis, and the velocity on this axis. Okay? And you see that, okay, there is a linear relationship between distance and velocity. Okay? So now I'm saying something new. So I'm saying not only galaxies are flying away from me, so I'm here, I observe, I see all the galaxies going away, but if I observe a galaxy which is very far away, its velocity will be higher, while if I observe a galaxy which is nearby, the velocity will be smaller. Okay? So this is what the experiments were telling. And you know, it was this period in which it was very difficult to accept that the universe was evolving. There were experimentalists like Hubble, observers. At the same time, there were theorists like Einstein, Friedman. But for some reason, everybody wanted the universe to be static, because at the end, both the data and the theory points towards an evolving universe. And so this was the beginning, if you want, of cosmology. People realized that the universe is evolving. So let me try to explain what this is called Hubble law. Hubble law means that there is a linear relationship between the distance and the velocity. Let me explain. So you probably heard that people describe this saying that the universe is expanding. Okay? So in what sense it is expanding? Well, I suggest the following analogy. So think that, so this analogy, so we live in a three-dimensional world, but now for this analogy, I'm just thinking about two dimensions. So I'm just thinking about the surface of this balloon. Don't think about the rest. Just think that you live on the surface, like an ant living on this surface. So you cannot leave the surface. The world is the surface. Okay? And let me populate this balloon with different galaxies, okay, which are, I mean, I glue them on the surface of this balloon. And then I decide that I live, for example, on the red galaxy, okay? I live here. Then let's inflate the balloon, okay? You see what happens. So first of all, you see that if I live on the red galaxy, I see that all the other galaxies are going away from me, okay? Because if I look at this, you see, it's going away, this is going away, and all the others. But notice that this happens wherever you are on the balloon. So it's not that we are in a strange place in the universe and everybody is escaping from us. It's just that wherever you are on the surface, you will see that galaxies are flying away. And if you think a bit more, you will also see that this is a bit trickier. That the largest is the distance. So if I look, for example, at a galaxy which is very far away, the velocity at which it flies away from me in going from a small balloon to a larger balloon is larger the farthest away the galaxy is. So what I'm saying is that this picture contains exactly this Hubble law, so the fact that the velocity is proportional to the distance. Well, the reason is that, so if the balloon gets double in size, so every distance is multiplied by a factor of 2. So if a galaxy has a certain distance, after a certain time, it becomes twice. Okay? So this implies that the largest is the distance, the biggest is the velocity at which the galaxy flies away from it. Okay? So again, I'm not sure if this analogy is perfect. For example, maybe just to get rid of the idea that, because the typical question is, when I describe this, is to ask, okay, but what is the center of this balloon? So where is, in our universe, where is this balloon? So maybe another analogy, which is very similar, don't think about a balloon, but think about a tablecloth. So I put a tablecloth on this table, and I put the galaxies like piece of paper on the tablecloth, and then the tablecloth expands in a sense that homogeneously becomes bigger and bigger, like an elastic tablecloth. So you see that, first of all, there is no center. So if I live on the tablecloth, I look around, I see galaxies flying away. And maybe it's a bit better analogy. Of course, you should take this analogy, but add another dimension, because we live in 3 dimensions, while the surface of the tablecloth is just 2-dimensional. Okay? Okay, this is what we say. I mean, okay, of course, we say it with a bit more of mathematics, but this is the idea behind the statement that the universe is expanding. The fact that this data implies that the universe is behaving in this way, and it's expanding. Okay? And this was the big discovery. So the universe is not static, it's evolving, and actually it's expanding. Okay, good. So let's push these. What are the consequences of this discovery? So it's a big discovery, so the universe is evolving, there is an history. Okay, so it's not a boring, static situation, it's evolving. So what is the history? Well, if I look at this picture and I extrapolate, so since the universe now is expanding, if I go backwards in time, it's becoming smaller and smaller. So the balloon is shrinking and shrinking if I go backwards in time. So this is the tablecloth. Now we live in this 2-dimensional plane. And you see that, again, if I go forward in time, galaxies are more and more separated. If I go backwards in time, at a certain point, if I extrapolate, then all the galaxies should sit one on each other. Okay? And you remember that a gas, so if I take any form of matter, for example, a gas, so if I go to smaller and smaller volume, okay, which means going backwards in time, of course, the temperature of the system goes up, because I'm concentrating all the energy in a smaller and smaller volume. Like I'm compressing a gas, so the temperature goes high. And if you look at the details, it goes in a way which is inversely proportional to the size of the universe. But it's not important. So if I see that the universe is expanding, I believe that I can extrapolate this in the past. So the conclusion is that if I really believe in this picture, the universe comes from an extremely energetic phase in which all the matter that we see around us is concentrated in a smaller and smaller volume. Okay? Again, there is no center, no? In a sense that what we are saying is that this process for which, so imagine that this, it's a plane which is infinite in all directions, okay? so this is a piece of the plane. If I go backwards in time, it's still infinite, but it's more and more, but the distance between different two galaxies is becoming smaller and smaller. So if I extrapolate, the conclusion, until now it's just an extrapolation, but now I will explain why we believe strongly in this. The extrapolation is that the universe comes from a very, very energetic state, which somebody, to make fun of it, call it the Big Bang. It was a way to make fun of this picture, because, again, at that time it was very difficult to believe that the universe started in some way. So they call it Big Bang to make fun of it. Then, okay, this word remained. And now, this teaches another important lesson. So, you may think that studying the whole universe is complicated. And you may think that going backwards in time is even more complicated. Because you say, okay, studying the universe now, okay, I can look around, I know something, but studying the universe at the beginning, I don't know anything. It's already difficult to study the beginning of the Earth, okay? Actually, this is not the case. So the universe, the early universe, is simple. And this is one of the reasons why cosmology made substantial progress, because it's not so difficult. Okay? What is the reason? The reason is that I told you that the universe becomes hotter and hotter. Okay? Now, if you heat any object and you heat it a lot, at a certain point it will melt. Okay? So if I reach an extremely high temperature, everything that existed, the galaxies, the stars, the planets, everything will melt. And everything will become decomposed in the fundamental constituents of matter. Okay? So in the early universe, there are no galaxies, there are no men, there is no Earth, there is nothing. Everything is just a collection of the fundamental particles of the universe. So it's a soup. They call it a soup. It's a soup. And for example, this, just to say how much it simplifies. So these are atoms, which are formed by electrons going around nuclei. Okay, this description is okay in everyday life, but if the temperature becomes extremely high, at a certain point, electrons do not stay around the nuclei, they just fly apart. So there are no atoms, but everything is simplified. There are electrons going around and nuclei which are independent. If you go on and the temperature becomes even higher, then also nuclei, which are formed by neutrons and protons, do not stay bound, but they decompose. They become neutrons and protons. And then if you heat it up even more, neutrons and protons melt, and you are left with quarks. Okay? So everything simplifies. So you go down and you find the fundamental constituents of matter. So you are down to this. Okay. These tell you also some other important lesson, which is that there is a deep connection between cosmology and particle physics. Okay? At the beginning, it's not obvious. So when I was showing you the picture of the galaxies far away, billion of years away, it seems very, very far from particle physics. Why the two are connected? The connection comes from this picture that now we believe in, which is the fact that the universe is expanding, so that the early universe is made of fundamental constituents of matter. So this creates a link between particle physics and, so that is to say, the study of fundamental particles, fundamental interactions, and the history of the early universe. So, for example, when you want to discuss the early universe, you don't talk about galaxies, planets, stars, and so on. You talk about electrons, protons, neutrinos. It's all there is, okay? And the language is now very similar to a colleague that works in an accelerator and wants to study how matter behaves at a very fundamental scale. Okay? Let me, okay, so I want to convey this message. So sometimes when you read the news, it's not so easy to understand how much of what the people say are construction of our imagination compared to something which is solid and proved. Okay? So, and I think it's always important to ask this question because many times it's a construction of our imagination. Okay? So now it's a bit technical, but the message is the following: that I want to tell you that the story that I told you about the universe starting being extremely energetic and so on is not an extrapolation. Okay, you see that it expands. Maybe in the past it was, but no, it's something that until a certain to some extent we really believed in very, very precisely. Okay? And the reason, very quickly, one of the reasons, there are many, but I make an example, is what is called nucleosynthesis. So nucleosynthesis is exactly what I described. The fact that at very high temperatures, nuclei are dissolved into neutrons and protons. As the temperature drops, you form nuclei because they stick together. Okay, now I have a very simple problem. Okay, I start the universe at very high temperature. I have neutrons and protons. I cool the system, and I form nuclei. Okay? Then, if I know everything about physics, I should be able to know how many nuclei of a given kind there are compared to another kind. Because the system is simple. I start with neutrons and protons, and I just lower the temperature. Okay? It's like a recipe. I just take it, I lower the temperature. So I can calculate this. I cannot, but people can do it. So you can do it quite precisely. So, for example, you have the formation of the simplest it's simpler to look at the simplest nuclei, for example, helium or deuterium. Okay, I mean, of course, I don't enter into details, but the point is that I can sit down, I can do the calculations, so if this picture of a universe which starts at incredibly high temperature and cools is true, then I should see that in the universe there is a certain ratio between the amount of helium and the amount of hydrogen, okay? Because this comes from my calculation. You go and you check, and it works, okay? It works remarkably well, okay? This is one example. I'm not saying that this is the only one, but this tells you that it's not only our imagination. The universe really works like this. And so we are quite confident that the universe reached a temperature at which this process of formation of nuclei occur. Just to give you an idea, this is a temperature which is like 10 billion degrees, which is much higher than the temperature inside the sun. Okay? So the whole universe was at a temperature which is orders of magnitude larger than the temperature inside the sun today. Okay? And this happened 13.7 billion years ago. Okay? So this is just to tell you that we know the history, some part. Okay? There are some parts for which we don't know anything, so don't. But we know something, and this something we know it very precisely. There are many other things that we have no clue about, and it's important to distinguish between these two. Okay, so I was telling you about the connection between cosmology and fundamental physics. Well, now I did a disaster. Okay. So there is a button that when you press, it goes away. So this is something that I already mentioned. So what I want to stress again is the fact that that the two frontiers, so the study of the universe, as I was describing at the beginning, and the study of that occurs at the accelerators, like the one at CERN in close to Geneva, is really the same physics. So it's surprising that, for example, imagine that somebody has an idea that there is a new fundamental particle, with some interaction with the particles that we already know. Well, if this particle exists, we should try to create it at CERN. Okay? This is one way to check this hypothesis. But also, if it existed, then it will be created in the early universe. Okay? So in this soup of particles, also that new particle will be there. Okay? And these two things, they really talk to each other. And nowadays, the two things are really very connected. We have particles. We know about the particles both from the cosmology side and from the study of accelerators. So these are really the same kind of game. So, okay, so this is just to show. But I'm sure that you saw some of these pictures. So this is one of the detectors at LHC. This is a man, just to tell you how big it is. But again, so the message that I want to convey is this deep connection between cosmology and particle physics. This is another picture of before. I mean, this was during the construction, so now it's all filled. But, how much time do I have? Because I can talk for a long time. And maybe 15 minutes, 10 minutes. Okay. Okay, so let me comment on this slide. Sorry, this is not. I don't want to scare you, but I want to convey one message on this. So this is. I mean, it would require a different talk, but this is the status of the art now. So these are the particles that make what is called the Standard Model. Okay? These are all particles that we know very well, including now the Higgs boson. Okay? So there is this formula, which does not matter, but what I want to stress is that it's quite a compact formula, which supposedly describe everything we know almost in the universe. Okay? So one thing that I don't want to enter into details, but I want to convey, because sometimes I have the impression that the way particle physics is presented is not very fair, because one can say, okay, so they spend billions of euros to look for a particle, for example, the Higgs. Okay, but this particle, I mean, never played any role because we didn't know it existed. Okay, so is it so important? So it looks a bit like looking for a new species of a particular animal. Okay, I don't know if it's not so important, no? But this is not is a really a wrong way of looking at things. Okay? So the picture that we have of particle physics is extremely constrained. Okay? So, for example, recently, like already 5 years ago, the Higgs boson was discovered. But okay, it was not like, okay, we found finally this particle which didn't play any role in human life so far. So just to tell you, so in the absence of this particle, the whole construction would be wrong. So the picture is that we have some fundamental laws of physics, like special relativity, quantum mechanics, which are very, very constrained. Okay? So when you listen and the people are looking for a particular particles, they are not really because they are obsessed to produce this particle but the construction is so rigid that they are basically checking that our fundamental principle work. Okay? So the existence of this particle, for example, was a fundamental, and the same thing can be said, for example, for the top 20 years ago, and so on and so forth. So it's not like that we're obsessed about producing that particular particle with this particular, but it's a test of our fundamental principle. Sorry, this was a parenthesis about particle physics. So now we come back to the video that didn't work, and we go on. Okay, so you remember the video was showing galaxies farther and farther away from us until something like 10 billion light years away. Okay, so I told you that the farther I look, I'm looking at the universe which is younger and younger. Okay? At a certain point, if I'm able to look at something which is extremely far away, then at a certain point I will see the universe when it is very, very, very young. So the early universe. Okay? And this is really what we can do. We can, so this goes on from that point. So we go on even further. And at a certain point, you start seeing some light here. Okay, so it goes on. These are still our galaxies, quasars, very far away objects. So you see, this is the map that I was telling you. At a certain point, there is something new that appears. And how you should look at this picture? You should look in this way. So I am here, and again, the farther I go, the younger the universe is. Okay. So these are younger and younger galaxies, At a certain point, you reach a moment in which I told you the galaxy did not exist. So at the beginning, the universe was all simple particles. Everything was melted. So everything was, there were no structure, there were no galaxies, nothing. So it was very simple. And what you see is this sphere is exactly when the universe was very young, so there were no structure. Okay? This is what is called the cosmic microwave background. Okay? What it is? Well, it is just light, so it's electromagnetic radiation, okay? Which comes to us emitted by the early universe. Okay? So now I will make, maybe I have a nice analogy. Okay, before we get into this, let me some history. So this map that I was showing you, this sphere, can be plotted in this way. This is one of the maps that I was showing at the beginning. So this is 1992. Okay, this is the map of the universe of this cosmic microwave background radiation in 1992. It's very nice. This was a revolution because it was the first time that we were seeing a map like this, but not very precise. Okay, so it's like when you see these maps of the old times in which some of the continents are not really of the good shape and so on. Then we decided to do better. So, sorry, this is in Italian. So glasses with a cost of $150 million. Okay, so we want to do better than this. We put glasses, get a better map with more resolution. Okay, a better experiment. So you see that now it's the same map. So if you look, so it's really the same map because this is blue and this is blue. Okay, it's the same map but seen better. Okay, it's really like going and exploring and doing more defined map of the universe. Then we did it again, so even more expensive glasses. And this is Planck, which is an experiment that finished recently. It started, taking data in 2013, and this is a very high resolution map of the universe. Okay? So what is this map? Okay, let me explain what it is. So I told you that if I look in a certain direction and I look sufficiently far away, at a certain point I see the universe when it is hot. Okay? So I measure, if you want, the temperature of the universe, of the early universe in that direction, and I plot it here. Okay? So one point is the temperature in that direction, and then I have the temperature in all directions. Okay? If you want, just to draw an analogy, is doing the following. So when I observe a cloud, what does it mean observing a cloud? It means that I see the light that comes from the surface of the cloud. I cannot observe inside. I just see the surface of the cloud. Now, the same happens on the universe because at early times, which is here, early times is so dense that nothing comes out. Okay, so it's like being inside the cloud. At a certain point, it becomes more and more dilute, so that at a certain point, like in the cloud, the light is emitted. Okay, so it's a really close analogy. So I see the light coming when the universe is sufficiently diluted that light can travel. Okay. So this is so I look at different directions and I do a map like the one I was showing. Okay. So it's really so this is a map of the universe, a very detailed map of the universe when the universe was around 1,000 times smaller than today. Okay, so the distance. Okay, there were no galaxies, but I mean, it's like saying that the distance between two galaxies was 1,000 times smaller than today. Okay? It's a really completely different universe. So it's a universe in which there are no structure, there are only atoms. Okay? They are basically hydrogen atoms and a bit of helium. And it's very simple, so it's a very simple universe, but it's simple also from another point of view, that I didn't tell you what is the scale of the plot, okay? So actually, the temperature in different directions is basically the same up to a very tiny correction. So when I draw something which is blue or red, I'm just amplifying a lot. So the temperature is 2.7 Kelvin in all directions with very, very small, tiny deviations, okay? So the universe, the early universe is not only simple because it's basically down to the fundamental constituents of matter, also it's a very homogeneous. So the universe nowadays is very clumpy. There are galaxies, so you can be in the middle of nothing for a huge volume. Then there is a galaxy which is very dense. Inside the galaxy there are all the stars, and so it's very inhomogeneous. Somewhere there is something. Here it's completely different. It's like the sea with very, very small ripples, but on average is everything the same at each point. Okay. So let me conclude. So now you see that we are quite. So we have a very simple universe at the beginning with very, very tiny fluctuations. Okay. Why these fluctuations now? So now, why the universe is almost homogeneous back then and now is very clumpy? Because gravity is attractive. So what happens is that if there is a region which is a bit less, matter, let's say there is a region which by chance there is a bit more matter. Well, this matter will start accreting, will start pulling through gravity things, and it will become bigger and bigger, and eventually it will give rise to clusters, galaxies, planets, and so on and so forth. Okay? Okay, I say this in words, but there is a really quantitative measurement of this. So we can basically, nowadays, we can look at this map, look at this early universe, and follow it, and seeing the fact that structure form, okay, so by gravitational accretion, there are places where a lot of matter goes, and you form structures and all the astrophysics related to this. Okay, so this is a nice picture of. Okay, so this is this matter. Okay, this is simulation. These are not real observations, but just to give you a flavor, the idea is that. So this is a simulation of matter in the universe. This should be similar to what I was showing. No, I was showing the distribution of galaxies. Those were real data. This is a simulation, so they should match if everything is okay. But this gives you a flavor of how the universe is. So you see, you start with a homogeneous universe, and then gravity is attractive, so you form these blobs, okay? And inside these blobs of matter, all the astrophysics and stars and planets and galaxies will form. Okay. So I want to conclude because it's late. I don't want to bore you. I leave you with something that I didn't have time to explain, so it would take another lecture. But the natural question is the following. Okay, you see this picture, and there are these small fluctuations. Okay, so I told you it's almost homogeneous, but there are these small ripples, small waves. Okay, so you can ask where are these? Why there are these waves at the beginning? So why there are of a given size? What is the origin of these small perturbations that evolved to give rise to the present-day universe, which is very inhomogeneous? Well, I don't have time to tell you. I tell you the answer, what we believe is the answer. We are not completely 100% sure, but it's 95%. It's quantum mechanics. Okay, so I mean, I will be very sketchy, but just to... the idea is that it can be made very precise. The idea is that in the early universe, the universe becomes very, very, very small. Okay? And you know that at very small scales, quantum mechanics becomes important. So quantum mechanics is the physics that describes the interaction of particles at short distances. Okay? I told you that the universe is really like an accelerator. At early times, we are looking at very small scales. At small scales, there are quantum fluctuations, okay? Which, I mean, pictorially, I describe like this. So at the quantum scales, you may have heard about the indetermination principle, which tells you that you cannot really be at rest, okay? Particles on very short scales, they have an intrinsic uncertainty, they have an intrinsic movement that you cannot remove. Okay? The idea is that the source of these perturbations is quantum mechanics. Okay? So it's kind of nice because so you start with an early universe, and the universe is homogeneous, but there is quantum mechanics, which creates these perturbations. Okay? These small perturbations are amplified by gravity, okay? And this gives rise to the universe that we observe. Okay? Okay. I don't have time to go into details, but this is the frontier of what we are. I mean, one of the frontiers of this field. This statement that is very vague can be made very quantitative. Okay, so it's not just words. So if the universe, if the initial conditions of our universe are set by quantum mechanics, there are experimental signatures. So far, it looks great. So I think we are almost convinced that that it depends. I mean, I think it's an overwhelming evidence that the source of perturbations is due to quantum mechanics, but okay, there is still room to make it better. This is what goes very vaguely under the name of inflation. So inflation is this period in which these quantum fluctuations are relevant, and is one of the frontiers of cosmology nowadays. So I stop here. I want to leave you with I hope it's in English. Yes. Okay. I mean, there is a quote from Einstein in. Sorry, in. I pressed the wrong button. Sorry. So there are a lot of quotes by Einstein, but I like this quote in the context of cosmology, because I find, if you stop for a second, I find very remarkable in various ways the fact that we are able nowadays to have a precise quantitative description of the evolution of the universe from very early times to today. So it's, I think it's, I mean, you know, it's not something that we can reproduce in the lab. It's not something that we can, but I hope that I convinced you that we have a quite precise picture. There are many questions still open. I'm not saying that it's, but some phases in the universe are very well known, and I think it's very remarkable that we are able to make such statements. Okay, thank you for listening.